We are so grateful for everybody who's joined us tonight and throughout the last couple courses of Biology Base Camp. There's multiple classes assembled here tonight. All of you have been on the ascension through Biology Base Camp, and now we all get to meet here at the summit all together here. We're really pleased to be with you. It's always a joy for us to just see your journey through the testimonials that have flown in through the seasons here for us, and I can't really express enough gratitude on my side of the equation. When you put something like this together as a vision and then you have a team that comes to believe in that and deliver that, it's still all for naught until we get the response from you guys, not just in testimonials, but actual human transformation. Because all of the energy that's gone into this is not about creating a product or an IT platform or a business. It's about engaging with other humans. The reason we're doing this through your computer now is so that we can reach more people at once. The joy of being in an exam room for me and being face to face with a patient who's in a crisis state and then see them ascend to a state of transformation and joy and to find that wellspring of life that's within them is a goosebump moment every time. It never gets old. And it was a big leap for me to go to the point where I felt like I could create that same goosebump experience through a camera to many, many people at once. And it was a hope because we knew that in our clinics we were reaching a few and we have to reach the masses. And part of reaching all of you is really creating a momentum and a ripple effect that tears all the way through the world community. Change is something that is infectious. That's something I've been completely convinced of now over my 10-year journey outside of academia. It's not some peer-reviewed journal article that gets featured in CNN or someplace else that creates transformation. It's human beings being in touch with human beings. And so we congratulate and recognize all of you who've engaged intensely and seriously, not just with me, but with your coach and with all of the other people along the journey that you've touched. Meredith and Jen Perel, who's been head of our coaching, have touched so many of you in Q&A, and your coaches have reached out thousands of times with different questions to be answered and to enrich our material. And we want to recognize that as well. This material would not be what it is without all of my patients at Revolution Health Center and then at the M Clinic and now with you guys. At each stage, the material has gotten richer, the material has gotten more real to me as I've become more and more convinced of my own transformation and more blessed by the transformations of my patients. And so this is a real hallelujah moment for me to be able to stand in front of you live and be in such joy for the miracle of human connection. When we wake up in the morning, and we have so often, if you're anything like me, woken up in a week or a month with that sense of like, yeah, but what is it all for? Like, you know, it takes so much energy to keep pushing the envelope. And then a human being reflects something back at you for a moment to show you how far you've come or how far I've come. And it's humbling and it's wonderful. And it's the idea of, wow, I hope we're just scratching the surface, right? I hope we are just beginning the process of self-transformation, human transformation. And so thank you for being here with us tonight. We're going to be on a journey of frequently asked questions that have come up in my career. But you guys have asked these after digesting all of the material, and that will further enrich the material for classes to come, I'm sure. But I hope for every one of you tonight, you'll get a glimpse into the other people that have been on this journey in parallel with you, perhaps unseen, but certainly present. So thank you for joining us live tonight. If we have any blips or glitches, it's another reason why we tend not to come live when we're trying to really address the meat of the content, because we want that to be uninterrupted. So if we have any glitches, we'll work them out, and we appreciate your patience. If you need to step away during these 2 hours, don't worry, we are recording this and it will be posted, and you will have access over the next 6 months to come back to this FAQ material. So if you need it, it will be there for you. I do want to give you a sense of the trajectory of the 2 hours. We're going to dive into FAQs, and I really want to make sure that for the most part, we're going to be really focused on questions that are pertinent to the entire crew. Now, and that's 2 levels. Number one, we're probably going to try to avoid really personal questions that come through, and many have, and we understand and sometimes the desperation that's behind that and sometimes the excitement that's behind those personal questions. but unfortunately, and we want to maximize the time of the whole group. And also there's that chronic medical legal reality where we need to be an education-based system here. We can't be your physician. That would be considered telemedicine. It would broach my medical license and other things. And so we're going to be limited in some ways to the type of question, but there's innumerable questions within that arena that we can get to tonight to hopefully deepen your experience and perhaps remind you of some of the pertinence that came up throughout the 8-week journey of Biology Base Camp. So I'm ready to go. You guys have already proved you're ready to go because the questions have been coming in fast and furious over the last couple of days, and especially in the last half hour. And so Meredith, take us away. What's coming in right now? What do you want to get at?
Awesome. Well, so many questions have come in, Dr. Zach, and what a blessing to be here tonight. This is so fun. So without further ado, we are going to jump in. Quite a few pre-submitted questions. So we're going to be kind of doing a mix between the pre-submitted and the live questions because there are a lot. So to start off with, the hot topic of fasting. A lot of questions have come in about that. So first one, how often can or should one do a 5-day fast? And what are your tips for best coming off the fast to avoid cravings? And also, why 5 days?
Perfect. So fasting, that's such a logical place to begin because nutrition, it comes at you 1,000 miles an hour on Facebook and Twitter and all of the internet feeds and everything else. Everybody's got an opinion on diet, but not too many people pushing fasting. That's an increasing number over time. You'll find a lot more on ketogenic diets and fasting than you ever have before. So it's starting to catch traction in the larger public discourse as well as it is in the medical literature. But it's not surprising that we start here because it's the biggest departure from your previous experience is very likely. Fasting at its core is something that dates back, as you know, to the beginning of religious teachings in every single type of religion on planet. And so we've seen it be part of not just physical kind of awareness, but spiritual awareness on some level. And so that's where I would like to begin is saying this is going to be a bigger story than biology in the long run, but I might not touch on all of that in the next few minutes. But the big story here around the biology side of that is really the witness of rest. When you stop eating, the amount of energy you save by sparing your gut, the entire neurologic system that runs that gut, and the immune system behind that, not to mention the entire process of moving that material through the vascular system, into cells, into the mitochondria, to translate that into ATP. It's an enormous amount of energy. Now, of course, you need that energy in the long run, right? If you never ate, of course, there would come a point where you would starve to death. However, that number is way out there, and that's pertinent because a lot of people are like, I can imagine fasting for a day or 2 days, but 5 days is a long haul, and I want to bring that into perspective for you for a moment. One of my colleagues runs a very busy burn center down in Georgia, and he got a hold of the fasting story about a year and a half ago, and he was frustrated. He was a physician. He was working his tail off for the last 25 years. And he had gained a lot of weight in that process. And so he considered himself about 60 pounds overweight, still pretty fit. He was still, cycling and doing a lot of things and eating relatively healthy. He wasn't eating junk food. He wasn't eating fast food. And yet he had put on a lot of weight through just deconditioning over time. And so he really resonated with the fasting story and took this to be his kind of pathway towards health. And so when I touched base with him and sat down and had dinner with him about 2 months ago, we were both teaching at the same conference and sat down with him, and he mentioned he had been on a fast. I was like, oh, cool, I teach fasting. And he's like, yeah, how do you guys do that? I said, well, we do intermittent fasting, the 5-day fast. And he's like, that's awesome. That's how I started. And I'm just breaking my fast here. Yesterday, I broke it with some liquids, and so this meal I'm having with you is the first solid meal I've had since starting my fast. And I said, well, how long has that been? He said, 57 days. That surprised me because I knew that was out there in the literature, a lot on long-term fasting, but I hadn't gotten to sit across somebody who had done a 57-day fast before. In that time, he had lost 46 pounds and had become a new person. He had so much more mental clarity. He had been more productive over the last month and a half than he had in what he thought was the previous 2 years. So he had really one of the most productive times of his professional career during this fast. Furthermore, he continued to work out on his normal schedule. He said in that 57 days, he only had 3 really bad days. And they seem to be maybe even unrelated to the fast itself. He had gotten a viral flu type bug that had torn through his kids and family, and he got over it quicker than anybody else in the family did. And then he had 2 other days. One was a trip where he had missed a night of sleep, and he got into a little bit of insomnia, got some fatigue, felt poorly for a couple days. And one of them may have been a food poisoning episode that came in the form of one of his liquid beverages, he had thought, and then in hindsight found out it had nothing to do with this liquid beverage. That was a fermented thing that he had tried. It turned out that, again, it was some sort of viral bug from his kiddo. So he had really experienced almost nothing in this 57-day period that you would expect from somebody who was eating all the time. And so I just wanted to share that story with you because I think there's this concern of like, I might get hypoglycemic, I might pass out at some point. The body is so good at adaptation. And for as much energy as you need from your food, you have enormous energy storage. We're at a unique time in history where almost nobody is energy depleted at that storage level. And so even when we are running at a normal body mass index, my BMI tends to come in a little bit leaner than normal just because that's the body I was born with and given by my parents. And so I'm a lean build, and then I go through life and I start fasting, and I had hypoglycemic symptoms every day of my life as far as I was concerned. I would start to get grumpy if I missed a meal. I would start to feel a little bit behind the 8 ball. And so it was hard to imagine I could make it 5 days. And so it was a great surprise when I did my first 5-day fast that I actually felt better towards the end of that than I usually did, or certainly early on in the fast. And I really had none of the typical hypoglycemic episodes after the first day. And so for the first day, you can expect that. So again, broad picture, people can fast for a very long time without adverse effects. So why do adverse effects occur? And so the question is really getting at here is, what is the rationale, A, for starting it? We've already kind of covered that. You're trying to burn through already stored resources, and that's going to clear out toxin, right? And so fat-soluble toxins is the norm in nature. So heavy metals, plastics, all of these things tend to be stored in fat cells. So as we accumulate fat, especially in our liver, they are very close to the source of the toxins. The bloodstream that comes from your gut is going to carry all the nasty stuff that might sneak into the body, and it's going to hit your liver first. So the liver is going to accumulate those toxins. So part of the big goal of that 5-day fast is to empty the liver of fat storage as fast as possible. For the first 2 days, you're still burning sugar. You don't even dip into your fat storage for any serious burning until probably day 2 to 3, and that's where you really start to go into almost a pure fat burn. And so that gives you a sense that even a normal body mass index like mine, I'm still burning sugar stores for 2 to 3 days no matter what. Even in a lean body habitus, your liver is storing fat from stress. And so any nutritional stress, whether it comes in the form of the famous Roundup and glyphosate that we talk about all the time, or alcohol, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and you go on, there's so many things in the day-to-day life that will induce and trigger this fatty liver thing. Glyphosate has really come into the news recently. You've probably seen even during the last 8 weeks, there's been a couple of things that have hit the national news about fatty liver from Roundup and non-organic foods. So that's to say that the fast is here to tap into the storage, including the stress storage of calories within your liver. All right, what was the second and third part of that? I think I'm missing pieces.
So why 5 days, and kind of the successful way to come off the fast too?
Very good. So the 5 days is of course arbitrary in the sense that once we've tipped past 3 days, you've started to burn fat. You can certainly continue this, and we cover that a little bit in the Biology Base Camp segment, where you can certainly push this out. And a lot of people are feeling, when you start to feel really good on day 5, it's very easy to push to day 7, right? For those of you that are still feeling kind of like you're hitting the wall on day 4 or 5, you can get to congratulate yourself. You made it through the 5 days, and that's a success. The reason I don't set it at 7 or 9 days, which would be reasonable targets, is that sense of success. I want you to get through the 5 days, and one of the nice things is we can squeeze that into a work week, right? The weekends tend to be our social times. It's where we engage with family and everything else, and I don't want that to be one of your main challenges the first time you embark on a fast. So the 5 days is a bit arbitrary in that it fits into the typical modern work week and everything else, and that's convenient. But biologically, it does push you past that 3-day mark, meaning you're starting to burn pure fat out of the liver. By the time you hit days 7 to 9 is when you get into the cloudy environment. So in days 7 and 9, and Dr. McDougall and a lot of other docs who have preached longer term fasting, like 14-day fast and 21-day fast, they'll tell you over and over again that if you're going to go past that 7-day mark, maybe at 7 days, it may be in that 9 to 10-day mark, where you can suddenly hit a brain fog and exhaustion and a real fatigue state for a few days, such that they actually recommend making sure that after 7 days you're off. You're not required to work. You're not having expectations on yourself. I'm not sure that that's often necessary, because I think most people can probably cruise to that 14-day period without a problem. But that gives you a sense that we start to play a little bit bigger game of potential adverse side effects to those initial fasts when we push past the 7-day mark. So that's, if not a totally arbitrary mark, we're trying to hit a convenience and a nice biologic marker where we feel like most of you will still be feeling well, if not better than ever, at the end of that 5 days. The more often you do this, the easier it's going to get to move into the fast. There'll be less kind of trepidation towards it, and the easier it will be to sustain feeling well and actually, recognize those milestones as you go through each subsequent fast. To come off the fast, again, gets easier and easier with time. But initially, of course, you want to be on liquids. To force a big protein meal into your belly right after a 5-day fast is probably going to lead to some bloating and some adversity. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to cause harm, but maybe some discomfort on the way in. So I always enjoy that liquid meal, the first one. For me, because of my kind of my makeup, I tend to be a low triple burner, which means that I don't do well with cold foods and I do better with warm foods. And that's like ancient Chinese medicine that goes back thousands of years recognizes that there's kind of those two forms of digesters. So me being on the cold side with the triple burner, I do better with warm foods. So for me to break a fast, I really enjoy a warm soup or broth. Miso soup is such a standout as an unbelievable way to introduce the food world back to you, because it's got such a rich fermentation history to it. The average miso is fermented for 1 to 2 years before it's shipped to the US to sell. If you're lucky enough to get Japanese miso that they usually don't export, they do 7-year ferments. So imagine one soybean, if you will, and of course they do more than one at a time, but imagine a soybean being fermented over and over again, digested and then turned out as byproduct, then digested and turned over as byproduct, then digested and turned over as byproduct by bacteria digesting that soybean every 24 to 36 hours for a whole year. So you're hundreds and hundreds of cycles through the digestive process of one bean before it gets to you in miso soup. That's an extraordinary journey of bioavailability there. And we've shown magical things in miso, its ability to digest and resolve even like radiation toxicity and things like this. So if you have experienced toxicity, whether you've had cancer and you've been exposed to traditional, kind of therapies of chemotherapy and radiation, or you're just a common citizen who's exposed to everything from car pollution to cigarette smokes, both of which have radioactive isotopes, it's stunning how toxic our bodies are and how we can survive that as well as we do. But miso can be this great sponge to suck that out at this moment when you've been fasting for 5 days. You've gotten all the junk mobilizing. Now throw miso in to get this incredible bacterial intelligence introduced to that system. So after the liquids, then go into the complex carbohydrates, because you want fiber. We got to get your parasympathetic gut going again, and so the fiber is going to make sure that food is traveling quickly through the gut. And so, don't go into a head of kale, right? So do some of the lighter greens initially, and so that might be mixed greens, it might be even some romaine or something like that. Going straight to the cruciferous vegetables, that would be like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, that can actually give you more bloating. They're more complex in their makeup, they're more dense in their caloric quality, and they're more dense in their micronutrients. And so you might do that on days 3, 4, 5 coming out of the fast. So start with the broths and then move into some of those easier to digest complex carbohydrates. All right, Meredith, what do we got next?
All right, awesome. Well, and to piggyback on the fasting, so for grazing, this question is the 4-day grazing and 3-day intermittent fasting superior to the 5-day fast? Why or why not? And then also, how can this, the grazing, the intermittent fasting be used for weight loss?
Fantastic. So grazing, intermittent fasting, is it equal to, better than the 5-day fast? Is actually nowhere near the similar thing. So I would look at one training for the other, one taking advantage of the other. Grazing is the perfect foundation to set up your body into a fast metabolism where we're training the gut to move quickly, move the plant-based material every 30 to 90 minutes through the intestinal tree to really get the speed built up so that you get a longer parasympathetic rest between your meals. And so between meals, you start to get real gut rest. That gives time for the immune system reset and everything else if you can speed up the transit of the gut. And so that's where the grazing really comes in. Speed up transit time and then get your body used to the fact that you never have to store calories because there's always availability. And you don't necessarily have to program in how much am I eating with each snack. Let your body tell you, get used to your body saying, hey, I'm kind of hungry right now. And instead of waiting till you're really hungry like you're used to doing, we'll just grab a couple of cucumber slices and throw them in your mouth and nip that in the bud, and your body says, oh, there's food readily available all the time. It's not going to spike ghrelin up. It'll keep ghrelin suppressed, which will keep growth hormones from spiking, keep norepinephrine and epinephrine, the adrenaline hormones, from spiking in response to the lack of food intake. And so you'll keep this nice baseline where the body and the brain feel fed. They feel like there's no deficit that would require them to store fat. So that's the purpose of the grazing. Set the baseline for the metabolism. I did this for years and years in my clinic without fasting my patients and got a lot of places, especially with about a third of the population. For that third that responded, it was mostly people that never ate well. They would actually go all day without eating until 2 o'clock, and then they'd be in this panic state and they would start to crave all the crap, and they would force feed themselves and try to ameliorate their kind of hypoglycemic reaction with all the wrong things. And so they were in this reactive kind of negative emotional state with their food. In contrast, when you set them into a grazing pattern, their brain and body for their first time realize, wow, I'm in a time of plenty. I can burn calories. I can build lean muscle. I don't need to store fat. And so for that third, it can be a real switch. For a lot of people, though, they would plateau on grazing, where they'd start to lose a little bit of weight, or they'd maybe not even lose weight, or they might just have a pound or two weight gain because they haven't started moving yet. They haven't gotten their lean muscle revved up yet. And so they might have a pound or two, and then they weight gain, and then they plateau there. So there's about a third that will kind of be stuck there. For that third, intermittent fasting is very powerful because it goes back and forth with the grazing. And that's what we taught you guys to really do, is shake it up for the body. Graze hard for a week or two, and then intermittent fast for a week or two. Graze hard for a week or two, going back to your intermittent fasting again. Shifting back and forth to that keeps your body from getting into any expectation. It keeps the body responding to the current environment, and it's going to make sure that the receptors are always ready for anything. If you lock yourself in a state of intermittent fasting for months or years, your body's going to get so used to that pattern that the normal surges of ghrelin and the norepinephrine growth hormone that might happen and then plateau starts to downregulate receptors over time, and your brain starts to get used to that. And the biologic effects that we would expect to get from that can actually dumb down. Dr. Mercola and I actually did a spot recently. If you saw that podcast, we talked about his experience with the ketogenic diet, where he was on a strict ketogenic diet doing intermittent fasting, and for about 2 to 3 weeks, it looked perfect. He was textbook. Blood sugars came down lower. He was like fasting blood sugars in the 60s with ketones 3+, 4+ in the mornings. It was perfect. And then suddenly his blood sugar started going up. His morning fasting blood sugar after another couple weeks was actually higher than it was before he had started the whole intermittent fasting process. That journey that he had is classic for the body's response to being stuck in a groove. What had happened is his insulin levels had gotten so low from intermittent fasting, burning some of the calories out of his liver. His insulin got so low that he didn't have enough insulin to push glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. So the cells start calling for sugar. The brain in particular will call for sugar. The liver will respond by mobilizing blood sugar into the bloodstream, or glucose into the bloodstream, and then there's no insulin to traffic that into the brain or the peripheral tissue. And so the result is sugar is mobilized, doesn't get out of the bloodstream, and your blood sugar is just going up and up and up. As soon as he ate a carbohydrate-rich breakfast, his blood sugar crashed back down to his best baseline. He ate carbohydrates, which is sugar, and his blood sugar dropped because he turned on insulin, and insulin was, just waiting to work. His body was desperate for the insulin activity to happen. And so it was the perfect example and one of the most regimented guys I know. When Dr. Mercola sets his mind to something, he does it to the nth degree. And so it was a perfect example from a brilliant medical mind who got told a story about intermittent fasting, but nobody had told him that the body was going to be intelligent enough to respond to that and make adaptation. So his body adapted, and the adaptation was not necessarily good for the long run. It was good for the short run for the body, so it had to make some acute reactionary changes. So I hope that answers some of your questions there on the intermittent fasting part. Shift it up with grazing, intermittent fasting. Don't let your insulin get so low that it can't do its work, but you also want to challenge the insulin, bring the insulin down and then bring it back up. That's what's going to keep a dynamic metabolism for you and keep you really deep with your resilience. I feel like I've got a deeper foundation than I've ever had right now in my life, and it has a lot to do with the fact that I've trained my body into traveling all the time, which means there's a lot of days where I won't eat until evening time, and I won't get any acute hypoglycemic reaction anymore. I haven't fainted in over 6 years now. I used to actually have fainting spells. I was severe enough in my transition as I went through kind of the plant-based change and then started fasting and doing different things. I would have severe hypoglycemic episodes, and I haven't had them in years now as my body has adapted and gotten used to this adversity, if you will. And so training your body back into healthy adversity is a really big key, is what we're trying to do by juggling these three together: grazing, intermittent fasting, and long-term fasting.
Love it.
Meredith.
All right, awesome, great. So while we're kind of on the topic of grazing and eating, two hot topics are gluten and dairy. So the gluten question is it okay if the food is non-GMO and organic to eat gluten? And then dairy, if you can kind of talk about how that affects the gut bacteria and if it's okay if it's raw and unpasteurized.
Fantastic. Start with gluten. So of course, gluten has been in the diet for thousands of years, and many of you have recognized, perhaps as we've reflected on in your biology base camp, that you can go over to Europe and you can eat gluten-containing foods, that famous Paris croissant on the roadside, and you get no bloating, no brain fog, no sense of gluten sensitivity whatsoever. And then you come back to the States thinking you're cured, and you have half a slice of bread with your lettuce and tomato sandwich, and you're suddenly in horrible brain fog, and it takes you 3 to 5 days to recover, and you're like, what the heck? What's the difference? The differences are multiple, of course. I think one of them has to do with the traditional recipes, right? And so the recipes that are cooked from in Europe go back thousands of years, really. And so there's something to be said for that alone, even before we start talking about ingredients and GMOs and everything else. These are recipes that were created, whether they knew it or not, for balance. And so the amount of carbohydrate and fiber and fat that you would get in a croissant has probably been perfected over those hundreds and thousands of years to really bring the best use of the water, the wheat, and the butter and all of that together to give you a balance that the gut can really metabolize and handle well. In contrast, you go to any bread maker in the United States, and by and large, you're having a very abbreviated recipe with an overemphasis on a couple of nutrients. And in that bread is often things that aren't necessarily gluten. Corn extracts are extremely common in the baking environment in the United States. And so we use things like maltodextrin and all kinds of emulsifiers and things that are usually extracts from corn. Carrageenan is a classic one that gets thrown in as an emulsifier from all kinds of things, from almond milk to coconut milk and beyond. We find these emulsifiers. These things can be noxious to the human gut, and we end up blaming gluten for it, when in reality the bread has got other things in there that might be causing some of your bloating and everything else. So that kind of a couple of things of maybe not a tried and true balanced recipe, maybe a bunch of hidden ingredients in there that sound benign on a label but actually are really noxious to the gut. Third, of course, then, is the preparation of the wheat itself. And so if you go to traditional grinding in Europe, you can still find stone ground wheat, which is maybe not their most common even anymore. But stone ground wheat phased out in the United States in the 1880s. So we're 150 years down the road, 140 years down the road of that journey away from stone grinding. Why that's important is because when we steel grind, like we do with the flours that we have today, we remove much more of the complex fibers out of there, and we get more and more concentration of the carbohydrate and the gluten-containing components, and we get that bouncier bread. You've probably noticed in Europe that the bread is denser. That's because there's less gluten fraction in there, there's more fiber, and there's more of these complex carbohydrate structures in there, as well as protein than you would find in the typical American loaf of bread. Excuse me. So for all those reasons, we can expect a different gut response. The microbiome is certainly going to respond differently. The microbiome is going to be much more broad when you've got that much bigger, nutrient panel that you would expect in a stone ground heirloom seed grain. We've hybridized our grains into oblivion in the United States to grow faster, to produce more per acre, to all these things that have nothing to do with nutrition, right? And so the grains themselves are less beneficial than I would say that the historic ones were. So for all those reasons, we expect gluten to be different in the United States than perhaps abroad. And I wish that was still the case today as it was 5 years ago, but unfortunately we have real creep happening. There's a creep that the Western growth techniques and seeds and everything else are moving into the industrial world, and unfortunately in the developing world across the globe. So I'm concerned that over the next 5 to 10 years we'll see a leveling of the playing field where gluten sensitivity will be global and not really focused in the US and Australia and Canada like it is right now. What parts did I miss on that one, Meredith?
Well, so the dairy question is next. So can you explain how dairy affects the gut bacteria, and if it's okay if it's raw and pasteurized, and if ghee is okay? A lot of people seem to do well with ghee. So thoughts on dairy?
Very good. So ghee is an interesting one. I'd say that ghee is one of those that kind of fits with the croissant. And ghee has been used for thousands of years. This lard is a consolidated portion of the fat component within that dairy product. And so I would say ghee is in a class of its own as far as an animal-based lipid. And if that's part of your diet and you say this is important for what I'm doing, I have absolutely no data to say you shouldn't eat ghee. Nor do I have any data that says if you don't eat ghee, you need to go eat ghee. And so if you've found that to be helpful in your own diet, I'm not going to tell you to depart from that. Dairy as a whole, then, let's take a look at that for a second, though. Dairy, of course, is the milk component that's made for this specific species. And so the most typical dairy we consume in the United States by far is obviously the cow dairy. And so our dairy industry from cows, that milk is designed with a specific mix of carbohydrates, sugar, and most of that sugar is in the form of lactose, and then a couple of proteins and a couple of antibodies from the cow itself. And so the antibody profile, the carbohydrate, the fat, and the few proteins that are in there are designed specifically not just for cows, but specifically for baby cows. A baby cow has a much different stomach scenario than a human being, obviously. They are rumen. Rumen have 4 pouches, not stomachs. The 4 pouches run at a very low acidity. And for that reason, they have a completely different microbiome than we have as humans. Dogs, chickens, and humans, interestingly, have very similar microbiomes. But you look at a cow or a goat or anything that would chew its cud or have that ruminant gut, and you're going to see a much different GI tract. So imagine the infant milk created for a baby cow. Totally different gut, totally different microbiome than you would have or your children would have. And then that cow feeds exclusively on that. That little calf will feed exclusively on that for anywhere from 4 to 6 months until mom kicks it off the teat, and then it goes and eats what the rest of its life? Grass. And so that cow, designed for that milk, recognizes that it's built for a very specific time frame of its life. And I believe that that's for purposes of longevity, really. I think that it would stress that animal more if it continued to artificially gain weight in an unhealthy fashion, especially central metabolically active fat from too much of a good thing. Too much carbohydrate and too much fat without the fiber and other stuff that it would be expected to get from the grass and the grains that it's going to go out there and graze on. And so that reality is an interesting to look at before we even start to talk about this story more in depth. Not made for humans, made for cows. Not made for cows, made for calves. That calf is going to grow from about 30 to 40 pounds at birth to 450 pounds in 6 months. Now, that's not the trajectory I'm looking for in life, and I think that most Americans have actually duplicated that growth pattern in their children, unfortunately, and in themselves by way too much dairy. Now, I think that those of you that are taking this course are not binging on dairy. I think you guys are eating it in scarce amounts often, and that I can't argue with at all. I don't have proof that it's harmful to have Parmesan on your Caesar salad a couple times a month. I don't see any harm in that from an overall standpoint. There's a few things we should be conscientious about because there's other things than health involved here. The treatment of those animals is a huge concern of mine. The modern dairy industry in the United States is one of the most tragic and questionable humanitarian things we do in regards to the ethics of it. The care of those animals is not where you would expect it to be at, and their exposure to antibiotics and the rest is horrendous. And so let's presume for a moment that you're not going to eat dairy from a commercial source. And a lot of people say, well, I don't buy any milk from the grocery store. Well, great, that's great. But do you have a latte? Do you have this and that from Starbucks or the rest? And that's where I think the creep happens, usually as an ingredient in something else. And remember that those drinks from Starbucks or another coffee shop, the majority of that is going to be milk. It's not like it's majority water and they splash in a little bit of milk at the end. They're literally filling that glass up with milk and then pouring a little coffee on top and then adding sugar. And so that we have a big creep of the dairy industry in and as ingredients where we get enormous exposure through things that we don't necessarily register in our mind of, oh, I'm having dairy right now. The latte means milk, right? And so we got to keep those little hidden things in mind and then ask ourselves, how do we feel after that latte? And I'm not talking about the 3 minutes after the latte because you feel freaking fantastic at that stage, right? You're like, that's the drug my brain was looking for. Hello, my brain is back on. I got my caffeine hit. I got a little perfect mix of fat and sugar. I got my cocaine receptors turned on in my brain with the fat sugar combination. I am good to go. But it's actually the 2 hours later that I'm interested in. How do you feel 2 hours after that latte? And that's likely where you're kind of bonking. You're hitting the wall. You've got a situation where your energy's flagging. You're starting to hit the brain fog. You're starting to get the deep blinks at your computer monitor. Head's starting to bob. So take a look at the bigger relationship you have with dairy, and 9 times out of 10, there's at least some drug component there. When you feel a little depressed or a little down, your brain knows what to reach for. It knows it's going to get a cocaine response from the fat-sugar combination of milk and dairy. And if it's cheese, you're going to even get a bigger hit because the casein is the main protein in milk and dairy. The casein in milk is relatively scant as far as one of its main components, but when you consolidate it to cheese, it becomes its main protein component. So cheese has this classic 1-2 punch where it gives you a cocaine rush on the front end with the fat salt sugar combination in there, and then on the back end when the casein hits the stomach lining, it induces an endorphin, which is a morphine response. So you get cocaine, morphine, cocaine, morphine, cocaine, morphine, and you wonder why the average American consumes about 36 pounds of cheese per year. And that's a lot of cheese for some people because a lot of us don't eat much cheese at all. And so somebody's out there eating 70 pounds of cheese for me, and that's a grim thought. 70 pounds of cheese, you're consuming an enormous amount of drug, which means you're suppressing your body's own quality of endorphins. Your own body should be making morphines or pain management all the time, and instead we've turned our attention or our subconscious to the food chain to get this artificial stimulation of these pathways that should have been addressed. And we end up with chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and all of these things. Mood lability, major depression, anxiety disorders, sleep disruption, all of that because we have this adverse relationship to our food chain because the companies were brilliant in their design of the food. The McDonald's Happy Meal was not a mistake. They used thousands and thousands of hours of real customer experience in 360 review of each of their foods to see how fast it was consumed and how much in volume it was consumed to slowly develop the perfect drug. And the Happy Meal hits it. It's fat, salt, and sugar combinations all day long, and our children's brains are programmed from it. And you think, well, my kids doesn't eat McDonald's. Well, if they're eating macaroni and cheese and they're eating chicken nuggets, same freaking process there. And so, it's very insidious how the food industry has snuck in to take over the drugs that run our brain. Meredith, what else you got for us?
Awesome. Great response. Well, let's switch gears a little bit because we've gotten a lot of questions on hydration and water. So to kind of start off, how do I know if I'm getting enough electrolytes, and would a homemade, healthy electrolyte powder be a good option? And then some of your favorite waters to recommend for health.
Woo! My favorite topics. I absolutely love water. As you guys know, that's why we finished the base camps with the water topic. It is absolutely the hottest topic that will come out over the next 20 years. We are at the tip of the iceberg of understanding water. I am very convinced that we will blow your mind in 2 to 3 years with even more data over this, so stay tuned. But what we know about water so far is that, again, variation is good. If you just drink reverse osmosis water all day, every day, you're not going to achieve what you're looking for. And so the combination of, or the variety of electrolyte-based waters and then distilled water and maybe some RO and some well water, whatever is necessary to keep the diversity going, that's probably one of the keys to success with water again. The fresher you can get with your water, obviously the better it's going to get. And when I mean fresh, when was the last time that water moved? An example for in my house, I was just this week tore out the pressure tank in my house, and I run off a 400-foot well that I had dug when I was building my house out in the woods. So I have a 400-foot deep well that's about 8 inches in diameter, and so it's a massive bore down, straight down 400 feet. It's hard to imagine a hole that deep. But that water is actually rushing through that space within the well all the time, such that there's sediment that moves through that well and everything else, because there's a little river underground that's moving through these with the movement of the aquifers. And so that's an example that historically, when we were all out of streams and wells, there was movement of our water all the time. Now what happens in municipal water systems is movement tends to happen intermittently, and then it pools for a long period of time. And when it moves through a non-natural system, it always moves in straight lines and 90-degree turns. And one of the amazing things that have been shown about water structure is that every time you force water through a 90-degree turn, it disrupts normal physics of the water, and you can change a lot of parameters of that water through that process of disruption of its normal flow state. And so one of the techniques that can be put into place is something like one of these movement filters. And so there's things that you can put on your flask that will actually vortex the water as you pour it out of your container that you might store your water in, a water filter or otherwise. There's also filters that actually have lots and lots of little pebble type structures within them to force vortex movement of the water through it as it comes out the spout. So you can look into the movement of water as another kind of unproven, if you will, yet, but an interesting step forward towards what about the motion of water and how is that important. So living water, how close can you get? Don't forget about the importance of bathing in water as well. That's another thing I'll throw out now. Remember that we were raised to be, in and around streams and the ocean and everything else. When was the last time you were bathing or really seeping your whole body in a movement of water? If that's been a long time, then certainly plan that next family vacation to the beach or to the lake or to a river environment, something where you can be in touch with that running water, to the movement of life itself. Water is absolutely at the heart of this. Recently in Hawaii, I was reminded of just the vital nature of water and the way in that humanity collects around it, right? For thousands of years, these communities on these islands have collected around the waterfalls and around the ponds and pools because it was their source of life. And now when I fly over the United States time and time again, I'm always amazed at how we have departed from the obvious need for water. You go over Las Vegas or you go over Mesa, Arizona or Phoenix, and you're like, what the heck did we do plopping down a bunch of green lawns and swimming pools in the middle of a freaking desert? Like, it makes absolutely no logical sense as to the way in which the suburban sprawl has led to the movement of humanity in this country. And so I would encourage you to think about for your family, because that's the energetics of your space. I personally am turned off by the energy that's in a Phoenix or a Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm turned off by this constant sense of I am in an artificial environment that should be desiccated and dry and having some microbiome of the desert. Instead, we're forcing this weird tropical microenvironment that breeds a bunch of weird fungi because they're not used to being here in the desert. And so we create these artificial environments and wonder why humanity is not thriving. So how close are you to that life? There's been a massive movement recently to the Pacific Northwest in our country, and it doesn't surprise me at all if you look at what's there. If you go up to Portland, Oregon, it's not the beer that's drawing people there. Portland, Oregon is in this valley that runs into the mainland that has got more waterfalls than any other canyon in the United States, apparently. And so this strip of waterfalls brings life and vibrancy, ionic charge within the air itself, that I know is subconsciously drawing humanity to it. Humanity is desperate, and all walks of life have moved into that Northwest out of this, I think, last-ditch effort to find where is thriving earth and life and the beginning of life happening, and it's going to follow the water again. So think about that in your life. Take a summer vacation. If you're somewhere dry, take a summer vacation to the lakes of Michigan or whatever it is and shift it up. Get into that different environment. Get close to running water. I haven't even started answering the question yet, so that should freak you out. All right. So the question is, what types of water should we be drinking, and how do you know when too many electrolytes are enough or when you've hit the threshold? The obvious thing with electrolytes is that if you start to have loose stools in the day, you probably have hit your threshold of electrolyte intake. So if you're consuming your normal electrolyte regimen and you're only having 1 or 2 bowel movements a day, you're well within your biologic limits of your capacity to handle those electrolytes. One theoretical approach would be to go ahead and push the amount of electrolytes up in volume until you hit a little bit of loose stools, and then you'll find your own personal threshold for that. You're welcome to do that if you want, but I've become pretty convinced that the routine that we've introduced you to there, with that 4 ounces every other glass, 4 ounces on the hour basically, of electrolyte water, you're going to get plenty over the course of a 3-day period to really start replenishing that electrolyte potential that's necessary across those cell membranes to pull free water in. Again, when we talk about what's best when it comes to water, I can't tell you that electrolyte water is better than reverse osmosis water or distilled water because they do different things, right? So distilled water is actually hungry for nutrient. Distilled water will actually extract things from your body in an effort to get electrolyte balance within the water structure. That's why I like using distilled water when I'm doing an intensive hydration protocol, especially during a fast. During a fast, I'm mobilizing toxin because I'm burning fat out of my liver. Distilled water is there almost like a sponge to pull negative crap out of my cells. And so it's there to act as ultimately a detergent. But if I just drink distilled water, I'm going to be on the outside of the cell sucking stuff out without really pushing water inside the cell. Therefore, we vary it. So distilled water, sponge it out. Electrolyte water, push it in. Distilled water, pull it out. Electrolyte water, push it in. In this process of shifting it up, we're literally creating a pump to clean out your cells. And I told you it would happen last time we talked in Biology Base Camp. And I want you to really test me out on this and test this theory, because I see it happen again and again. When you first start your water protocol, you're going to start to pee clear. You're peeing out free water because your body's not getting that water inside the cells yet. It's still just peeing out fresh water before it ever gets into your cells. But a few hours in, and if this is the very first time you've done it, it might actually take day 2 or day 3. The very first time I did a 3-day hydration protocol, it was the evening of the second day. And I got kind of freaked out because my urine suddenly not only went yellow again, I was drinking all the time, not only went yellow, it was foamy. It was foamy, had an odd smell to it and everything else. It looked like the urine that I saw in the hospitals of like my diabetic patients with end-stage kidney disease and stuff like that. I was like, what the hell is going on? Am I shutting down my kidneys by drinking too much water? And the answer was the opposite, of course. I had just for the first time in my adult life forced water inside the cells and pumped it back out, forced it in and pumped it out. And after 2 days of trying to do that, I suddenly got in. I suddenly pushed all the way through the cell membrane and sucked a bunch of crap out of there that had been sitting there, stagnating in my cells, and that was the youthifying moment for me. And that's what I want you to push to, whether this is your first or second or third. Pay attention to your urine color and push it. We want to see that yellow urine despite the intake of large amounts of water. We want to see yellow or foamy or frothy urine as you pull junk out. That's an exciting process for me to see that pumping action. There is nothing, I think, that will make you younger than that pumping action. That experience that you're going to have with hydration deep inside the cell is really reversing the whole process of aging better than anything else I've got for you. So how do we continue to support that hydration thing? We'll talk more about Restore later, I imagine, but the Restore is a big piece of that because of what it does to the macro structures, these macro barrier systems between you and hydration. The very first step is the gut lining. If you don't have a coherent gut lining, water will go through and leak right back out. It'll go through and leak right back out into your stool, and it will never have the chance to enter your vascular system. Put the gate back up and you're going to improve that electrical charge across the gut lining. You're now going to pull water into your body from your gut. Now you've got to get it across the liver and into the bloodstream To do that, you need high integrity of the membrane of the vascular system, this time called the endothelium. That endothelial lining needs to have that same high integrity, high Velcro quality that will keep the electrical charge so that you can translate water either to distant parts through the pipeline or translate it across the wall of the blood vessel into the surrounding tissue. Now you're in surrounding tissue, you're kind of in that lymph type environment, extracellular matrix. Now you got to push it across the single cell membrane. Then you got to push it inside all the structures in that cell, mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, the nucleus, and all these different structures. And then you got to pump it back out. So there's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer that are going to be supported by that extracellular matrix that we use Restore to support to really reach that full hydration potential. So that's why we start you on the journey the way we do. Let's start you off with get the gut intelligence up. Let's start getting the parasympathetic system of the intestinal lining revved up in weeks 2. Then let's give your immune system rest with fasting as you go into intermittent fasting in weeks after seminar 3 and 3. And then once you've started into that fasting process, you're going to start to experience the ability to hydrate. And so we then hit you with that hydration protocol, and we're building that. So Biology Base Camp was really about building that biology towards ultimately one thing, hydration. It is the gold star of everything else, and it is really your pinnacle event in this journey towards optimal health and longevity. All right, what else we got there, Meredith?
Love it. Well, I think this is a good segue to talk about Restore. We've gotten a number of questions about Restore. Here's one just to start off, and then you can kind of maybe talk about Restore and how it relates to hydration. This question, how long does Restore keep the junctions tight after, say, drinking a tablespoon?
Fantastic. So we're talking now about the biologic half-life, if you will, of Restore. So you take that teaspoon and take a tablespoon in the mouth, swish it around, you swallow that. It's going to line the gut over the course of the whole 2 test course. We'll get different molecular components of that as it's delivered down through the system. It's hard to imagine that, right? A little bit teaspoon, you think, how could that possibly wet this whole system? Well, remember, we're not trying to hydrate you with the Restore itself. But that single teaspoon of Restore has trillions and trillions and trillions, literally, molecules of its active ingredient. And so the trillions upon trillions upon trillions now are going to distribute through the natural liquid that fills your entire gut lining. And over the next hour or 2, it's going to distribute across the entire gut membrane to protect the system and turn on that whole protein synthesis and everything else going on that we expect with the extracellular matrix, upregulate glutathione, downregulate the activity and stress of the healthy cells, upregulate the signal for help from the unhealthy cells. It goes on and on, right? The science gets almost ridiculous that one thing can do so many things because it actually doesn't do any of them. It just tells the body, gives back that wireless communication network, and the body goes about doing what it's been trying to do the whole time, which is make all systems go. So all systems go with Restore. And now the question is, well, how long does that last with my 1 teaspoon? The answer seems to be down to a couple minutes for some of the activities of it, and then hours or days for other activities. And what I mean by that is the tight junction effect starts within minutes and continues over the next couple hours. And so you've probably got a 4-hour window between kind of initial support to the tight junction extracellular matrix and continued protein synthesis for a few hours thereafter. It's really our autistic community that's really helped us the most in mapping out this biological timeline of how long Restore works. In an autistic population, when they all take Restore in the morning, we almost immediately start getting feedback from their teachers and nurses at the school and everything else that the kid has done something dramatic. Like, what is going on in the kid's life? Totally different verbal scores, different engagement level, less mood lability. I mean, it's just like everybody's jaw on the ground. But mom is actually saying, I'm not sure I'm really seeing much. And the reason is because the kid goes to school right after taking Restore, and over the next couple hours has a dramatic biologic stability as the whole extracellular system starts communicating. But then that starts to wear off, and we weren't delivering a midday usage of it originally. If you've been with Restore long enough, you may remember the bottle 4 years ago used to say take twice a day. And we thought because of our basic science stuff that it would easily last 12 hours for kind of getting that plateau, and you overlap a couple 12-hour marks, and we thought we were going to have a steady state. And then we get the reports back from all the autistic families, and they said, no, we're not seeing any benefit by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the kid comes back. Same old mood lability, same tics, same neuromuscular excitement, same overwhelm from the kiddo. And so then we started to go back to the drawing board on the biologic half-life, and we realized that we were only really taking into consideration the molecules within Restore and not the biologic environment when we determined that twice-a-day usage. So what do I mean by the biologic things that we weren't considering, and what we weren't really thinking about hard at the time, we knew the facts but hadn't put it all together, was that the entire gut lining turns over every 72 hours. Which means if you break that down, every 3 days you have a completely new gut, which means every single cell has been replaced. Billions and billions of epithelial cells have been replaced, and they're all laced together with tight junctions. And so what happens is you take Restore and it passes through the gut, and then you wait for 4 hours or 6 hours and you eat another meal, and that material has moved on through the gut. Well, at least 20% of the tight junctions and the cells that are now going to be exposed, 6, 8, 10 hours later, haven't you ever seen Restore because they're brand new. And so if they get hit with the same chemical environment, we're going to see disruption there because they haven't come in touch with that signal from the greater environment. So that may be one of the main reasons why we see this 3-time-a-day benefit. And for more and more of my patients, I say more often is more important than the actual volume that you're taking. I'd rather have you take half a teaspoon 6 times a day than a tablespoon once a day. You know what I mean? So it may be the same or similar volume that you're taking, but the more often you expose that gut membrane, the more we're going to keep getting 100% of the membrane protected because the gut is turning over so often. So I'd say more frequent the better, and then the volume you can figure out the best of. And your body's an amazing biological assay, so I'm never going to tell somebody this is the right dose for you. You're going to figure that out through your own usage, your own experimentation of, you know what, especially when I miss a night of sleep and I just traveled and my immune system's a bit under the weather, I'm going to support it with a higher volume, more frequency, make sure I'm using my nasal spray a few times a day, really get the immune system supported in times of stress. Maybe when I'm thriving and I'm kicking butt, I feel fine with twice a day, whatever it is. So you'll find those patterns. I would trust your own body more than you would some exact prescription from me or another practitioner.
Beautiful. All right, so let's talk about grounding. This question came in. The earthing.com website has a medical advisory. Should someone on thyroid medication consult with a doctor before using the grounding products, or can anybody, use the grounding products freely?
Sure. I think a little bit of this is definitely just medical legal protection for the manufacturer here. To pick out thyroid condition among all of the other autoimmune conditions is arbitrary in my book. And so you can expect a similar result with any of the autoimmune conditions when you start to reduce inflammation and everything else. The reason they probably target thyroid in that warning is because it's certainly the most common among all of the autoimmune conditions, and it's certainly the most common in which has been compensated by a hormone. And so their thought process probably is along the lines of, wow, if this person starts to get healthier, they may need less thyroid hormone. Well, that's probably true. As they get healthier and their immune system comes back online and there's less inflammation, they will need less thyroid, but it's not true that the dose that they're on is necessarily going to be suddenly toxic to them. The healthy human body needs anywhere from about 100 micrograms to 150 micrograms of active thyroid hormone in a given day. The amount that we give in a pill is also between 100 and 150 micrograms typically. You may be down all the way down to tiny doses like 25 micrograms or 50 micrograms. All of that said, the person's total body necessity still is north of the amount we're giving in the tablet. And so even if your thyroid came back completely perfect and everything was well, if you were still taking the 100 micrograms a day of Synthroid, you're not going to hurt the person because they're not actually hyperthyroid. They're simply taking a thyroid pill, and their thyroid simply doesn't make that 100 micrograms of thyroid because it's already in the system. So this is the beauty of the endocrine system. You can't actually trick it very much. It can never get too far out of line because it's an adaptive system. It's going to first see how much hormone is in the system and then make whatever else is needed. So if you need 125 micrograms in the day and you just popped 100 micrograms Synthroid, your body's only going to probably contribute 25 micrograms over the course of the rest of the day to balance things out as needed. So I wouldn't worry at all about, in fact, I've never worried about thyroid patients starting grounding, and I put all of my thyroid patients on grounding sheets. So I wouldn't worry for 2 seconds on that as far as, its direct effect. It doesn't have any direct effect on the thyroid hormone itself. It's more of a downstream. If the person gets better, maybe they need the thyroid hormone adjusted, That's probably true, but the thyroid supplement's certainly not going to throw them into any thyroid crisis in the midst of that transition.
Beautiful. All right, so live question. What are the best times to do the 4-minute workout during the day? I do it in the morning before breakfast. Is it better before a meal rather than after? And I love your workout, sharing it with all our friends and family.
Awesome. Keep sharing it. I keep doing that in the airports right before I get on, and I have yet to see somebody get up and be like, Dr. Bush, you must be Dr. Bush. So it needs saturation still, so keep telling the world that they should be moving. So I love doing it before I need to be stagnant for sure. Across the country flight that I take all the time is my favorite place to get the blood flowing, get my lymph flowing before I have to sit there stagnant for a couple hours. So move before you get stagnant for sure. Personally, I don't like exercising on a full belly, and so I'd much rather do it before the meal than after the meal. But I tend to digest pretty quickly, so certainly within an hour of a meal, I have absolutely no qualms about doing the 4-minute workout. It's 4 minutes, and it's actually not doing that much in the moment. It's dumping the nitric oxide, which then has a biologic half-life that's pretty long. It's going to turn on your metabolism for the next few hours, not just in those 4 minutes. And so the benefits are long-lasting, and so the timing does not need to be exact. This is you have license to the 4-minute workout as wherever, whenever you want to do it. And I will applaud that anytime. So keep after it, and thank you for telling all your friends and family, because we need this country to start moving.
Amen. I love this question. I'm especially interested in the correlation between physical health and spirituality. I do research on why bacteria shift from competition to symbiosis, cooperation, and consciousness. Can you talk more about this? What surprising spiritual effects have you seen as people gain health, such as greater intuition or clarity or sense of meaning and purpose or a deepening sense of gratitude?
This is a huge, huge, huge question, and I applaud your area of interest, and I'm interested to learn from you over time as well to see what you experience and what you're after there. I probably shared it with you in Biology Base Camp a couple times in a couple different ways, in that I'm constantly amazed and humbled by the journey I've had. I certainly went into this whole doctoring medical thing without thinking that it was going to become this incredible spiritual journey that it's become for me. I certainly had a spiritual life before becoming a doctor, and as my life as an allopathic doctor, I certainly prayed with a lot of my patients and had a very, kind of Western Christian-minded worldview. As my world has expanded, as I've gotten, further and further reaches of the earth and treated and been with more and more patients, that I have profound respect for not only their humanity, but also their religious worldviews. I've come to see a lot of different truths come to pass that are so similar. A lot of this comes out of my journey in the ICUs, where I was actually resuscitating people whose hearts stopped, and had, in those few times that were successful in resuscitating them, it's amazing how similar their stories are. A Baptist minister from the Southern Baptist community, a wonderful African American community down in Virginia here, and a couple doors down from him in the same ICU, same night, dying as a gentleman with end-stage AIDS, who's alone but for an ex-boyfriend who's in there, and is trying to support him the best that he can, even though they were estranged for a long time. And so there's somebody in utter kind of loneliness and a state of kind of an atheistic worldview, dying doors away from this Southern Baptist minister that had so many visitors from his church congregation that we had to set up a room in the hospital for them all to stage in, so they could all move in a few at a time into his ICU room. And so you can contrast both of those, and they end up having the exact same near-death experience of entering into this space of white light, and they were overwhelmed with a sense of complete acceptance of who they were, intense love, and a real sense of joy percolating up from something deep within them. And then suddenly they were sucked back into the body by a well-meaning, clueless doctor who just resuscitated him, and they're actually both had the same reaction as, "Why did you bring me back? I've got a tube in every orifice. I'm in excruciating pain. I was just in the best place I've ever been." And having seen that night when they both died and both came back to tell me the same story, it was just a synopsis of a much longer 5-year journey I'd have in the hospitals, of seeing so many people from so many walks of life. When they pass the biologic threshold and the veil is lifted, they see the same thing. They see some sort of form of deity. They see some form of truth. They see some sort of incredible acceptance of who you are, and an acknowledgement of what you've been through in your short life. It's a leveling of the playing field. It's humbling. It warns us. It's a stern warning, I think, when you hear stories or experience things like this, that you don't know anything, right? We are scratching the surface of awareness. We're in these frail human bodies. We look through these bogus lenses that we call eyeballs. Have you heard of the Umfeld? The Umfeld is this German word that I love that speaks to our world perception. The Umfeld is what we think the world looks like. Humans think that rainbows look like rainbows, and we think that roses are red, and we think that, you know, the sky is blue. But in reality, the sky is not blue at all. The sky has no color to it. The sky is actually white light hitting the surface of the earth. It's our Umfeld. It's the receptors in our eye that give it some sort of definition of a color because of the frequency resonance that it hits as it diffracts through the water vapor in our Earth's atmosphere. A red rose has no quality of red to it. It doesn't actually have color. Color is not a biologic thing. Color is not a physical feature of anything. Color is actually the frequency of resonance of the light as it refracts off of that thing. So the rose is not red. The light that refracts off the surface of the rose is red. And so that's an example of, the way in which we've tagged reality with all of these artificial belief systems of labels. And we see somebody who's colorblind and we say, oh, you're silly. You think that pink is blue and blue is pink, and that's hilarious. When in reality, what's hilarious is the rest of us think that blue is actually blue. It is a perceptive quality that even among humans, if we're born with different rods and cones in our eyes, we perceive the world differently. We see color differently. Now you move to other mammals and you find out that they see the world completely differently. And then you move to something like a bat, for example. The mammalian world there is seeing the world through a completely different lens and sees a rose not at all to be a rose as we would define it. Has no color to it, has no structure that would even be similar to how we would paint or draw a rose. It would depict and paint a rose completely different in structure. And then you move into the insect world and it gets even more extreme. A bumblebee has absolutely no relationship to what we think of as a flower and what it sees as a flower. And so this is kind of where I'm getting at in a very big question that got asked about the microbiome and spirituality, our perception of the reality around us. The reality is we only should define it ultimately as truth and love and light. And everything is some variation of that. The truth comes out of love and light and the collision in any plane thereof. And of course the microbiome would be in that. Of course the insects would be in that. Of course the bumblebee is in that. Of course the bat is in that. Of course the human being is that. We are all, whether we're micro or macro or wherever we fall on that biologic scale, we're all on a very similar bandwidth of reality. We're far more similar to a bumblebee than we are to Mars, Venus, or some distant comet. The vast majority of the universe is so different in physical structure, but it's made of the same stuff. All of it's made of the same stuff, which is ultimately physical matter that is a creation out of the vacuum space. Vacuum space isn't the 99.99% of everything, and so the 0.01% that starts to take form of any shape, whether it looks like an inanimate object or an animate biologic shape, all of that is a change in vibration and nothing else. Which is why I'm so excited for you to build yourself a different body. You and I need to transform again and again and again. And if we get bored of the opportunity to transform, shame on us. Shame on us if we get stagnant. If you don't wake up in the morning amazed by the miracle of life, and I readily admit I do that frequently. I wake up and forget to say the first few things out of my head be thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my God, I can't believe it's real. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm in the body. Oh my God, thank you for this opportunity. Too many mornings I wake up without those things on the foretip of my mind and brain. Amazing to be in my body. And then the gift to be next to my wife. Unbelievable. What kind of gift is it that we get to be humans together? What kind of bizarreness is it that we step into this space together in real physical time, gravity, tipping point of humanity. Awesome, humbling, and a lot of days, frankly, embarrassing that we don't recognize the freaking miracle that is before us. The magic that we have the opportunity to engage with today, to have miraculous, magical transformation of who we think we are, who we can become, why we're here, the purpose, the mission, the pleasure, the moment. I don't even know the name of this movie that I was just told about, but I was reflecting to William Vitalis that you've heard me probably talk about before. We call him the unicorn. And I was reflecting a couple weeks ago with him and his wife Isa, and I was imagining the scenario because one of the colleagues I work with had told me that they had gotten the perception and download that there was angels involved in the moment that I had been engaged with, and to this day I've never had in my umfeld the vision of an angel yet. I haven't seen an angel that I can say there's an angel, and so in the same way I have a lot of pre-programmed beliefs about what an angel does because Christian Bibles and everything else had pictures of people with wings, and there's some descriptions of winged creatures and stuff like that, and we think we know what an angel looks like, but I have no idea what an angel would look like. And so I was reflecting on it. I was like, what if there are angels, and what if these angels actually could choose to become human beings, which some people believe could be happening. And I'd say, why is that possible? How would some entity like a soul or an angel decide to be limited to the human umfeld, to be squished into this box of perception and experience? And William, in his patient, just quiet beauty, listened for a few minutes, and we tossed a few things around, and then he said, you know what, this reminds me of a movie that I saw a decade or more ago, and I think he said it was from the 70s, but it depicted the scenario where angels were choosing to occasionally become human. And so some of the humans walking around in the movie are supposed to be angels that have embodied in a human in this lifetime. And they had some typical 1970s angel characteristics, like a long ponytail was their defining characteristic as being an angel, and they wore looser kind of tunics or something like this. It was a funny description that he had. But the profound thing that the movie said was that the reason these angels stepped in to human body and decided to give up all of the grandeur of being an entity that could move through space and time and be kind of at the beck and call of a mighty God and all of this stuff that we imagine angels doing, they chose to go into a human body so they experience the finite moment. I find that very interesting. These angels wanted so badly to experience what they were witnessing human beings experience. They saw human beings walking dutifully from bed to some nearby cafe, sitting down in the same chair every day, ordering the same cup of coffee so that they could bend their head over that cup of coffee and take a deep inhalation and experience this incredible, joyous feeling of pleasure in the moment. And the angels would give up everything to experience that finite reality that a human is limited to. So for as much as I talk about the grandeur of being human and how we can work miracles and everything else, we should never forget how freaking powerful it is to be in the moment. This is our gift as human beings. We're not distracted by the scope of all of human history, all of the history of life in the universe, all of the intention for life from God or whatever structure we see that coming from. We're not distracted by the knowledge and the experience of all of that. We are boiled down to this little split second in reality to experience finite life in a finite umfeld or understanding of the universe around us. And in that, there is exquisite pleasure. We should pause and remember that. Are you finding pleasure in your life? Many of you are so dedicated to this healing journey and to the journey of excellence that the mission has the ability to distract you from the miracle in front of you. I've seen it over and over again. I've seen the gurus out there become trapped in their own journey, become stuck on their own story, and end up unhappy and lonely at the top of something because they got so sucked into their journey towards something that they forgot to be present and in awe of their capacity to be in the finite moment, to smell that cup of tea in the morning and experience thousands of years of culinary genius that went into the cultivation of those plants and the combination with magical water, and that it would sit in front of you in your favorite mug and your hands are wrapped around it getting warmth from this cup of tea, and it's seeping your body with nutrient and reassurance and nurture. If you can't feel those things and you're not stopping often enough to smell the roses, which may or may not be red, that's a sad thing as a human being, to miss those opportunities. So don't let in the Intrinsic Health series and Biology Base Camp and anything I ever tell you distract you from the moment. Don't get caught up in, do I fast frequently enough? Do I intermittent fast frequently enough? Am I grazing frequently enough? Am I breathing frequently enough? We're going to keep bringing you tools so that can be a subconscious lifestyle. We're going to keep helping you reach the point where that all becomes a subconscious journey. Your body will know when it needs to do a hydration protocol. Your body's going to know when it needs to do a fast, and then we'll get better and better at telling you that clearly. You're going to get better and better at hearing yourself as you trust yourself more and more. I don't expect this to be instantaneous freedom for you. There's going to be a journey where you feel like this is a chore. It's a chore to remember to do this, and I'm trying to make these new recipes, and I'm doing this. There's going to be a period that's inevitably there's going to be some chaos and noise in there that I've created for you. We'll know you've succeeded for yourself, and you always succeed for yourself, not for us. There's no grading on this program. We're here to love you. We're here to put support systems around you. We're here to help inspire you by our own journey, which is only a step or two in front of yours at best. And so in that journey, I want you to find freedom. Freedom from any rules, any expectations that you may have or you think I have of you or whoever else on your team has of you. Freedom is what we're going for, and the freedom you will find is in the truth of your own self. Intrinsic Health series all day long. Why did we call it that? Intrinsic. It means it's specific, and within you is your healing journey. We're giving you at best an avenue into that intrinsic healing journey. We are not your healing journey. So find freedom in that, find joy in that, and stop and frickin' smell something beautiful. If you have a significant other in bed with you in the morning, wake up in awe that you can witness another human being. We have this baked up belief system about what perfection looks like, right? You look in the mirror and you probably think 1,000 things about, oh, this flaw, this flaw, this flaw. And yet, if you've ever fallen deeply in love with somebody, you know damn well that it's those things that you would see in yourself as imperfections that you are so in love with in that other person. It's the eyebrow or the other thing that's slightly asymmetric or has this pattern to it or is outside of the expected that makes that person yours, that makes that person so unique and wonderful to you. So don't look at yourself through the eyes of your own mind. Remember, you're looking in a mirror with an Umfeld, a perception that's been programmed into you. Instead, awe at deconstruct yourself in front of that mirror. Stop looking at the big thing and comparing it in your mind's eye to something you saw in a magazine or in a movie or something else, and look closer. Get into that mirror for a second and look at the light refracting off the iris of your eyeball. It's freaking insane. It's beautiful. There's a whole universe. All the colors that you would see in a supernova are going to be in your iris. I don't care what color your eyes are, blue, green, brown, whatever. You're going to find every color in the rainbow in your iris if you look closely. You have rainbows in your eyes. Glory in that. Be in awe of that. Then back up and see yourself as the compilation of 1,000,000 miracles. And anybody who fails to see you as 1,000,000 miracles is a waste of your time. Don't let them program you with their expectations, their concerns, their beliefs. Be you and find the miracle within every part of you, and we're going to get closer to the real state of joy and ultimately to the real state of love for ourselves. And if that golden rule is right, that we should love our neighbor as ourselves, when we finally find love for ourselves, we're going to love our neighbors excellently. And in that, we will end all of the patterns of destructive nature of humanity, start to move towards a cooperative existence that's going to sustain life and nurture life and regenerate life rather than suck it out of the earth that we live on. What do we got next?
Wow. I think we could end right there, but we're not going to. But wow, that was absolutely incredible. And I think just maybe one more mindset question before we move on is from this live question. What have you done to deconstruct disempowering beliefs? So personal techniques maybe you could share so they can kind of get to the level where you're at maybe.
You guys can shoot so far beyond me. I'm so sure of it. I am nowhere near some sort of pinnacle that you should be shooting for. The pinnacle that you might be looking for is within you. It's not me for sure. And so in the end, it's simple in that as soon as this is just like the grazing, intermittent fasting story. As soon as you think you've hit your stride, have the courage to reevaluate. There's a temptation to believe that life is going to get easy, and at some point I'm just going to be perfectly healthy and I'm just going to know how to do my fasting, do my grazing, do all these things. And I can guarantee you I have never hit that plateau in myself. I've never hit that moment where like, nailed it, that was a perfect month. Never. It's never going to happen because I am pushing my envelope bigger all the time. If I got comfortable with life, then I'd be pretty sure I wasn't pushing the paradigm hard enough. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I want to be transforming. And I've come to understand, and my wife has given me a lot of insight into this actually, because my upbringing in the Christian church had an insidious way of programming in that suffering is good. I don't believe that's true anymore. And I certainly suffered a long time emotionally and socially and other things, believing that was part of the journey towards purity or something like that. I think now that there's a lot of danger in that message. To normalize suffering is not the right thing. I really believe that suffering is a powerful lens for us to look through, and it's a powerful teacher, but it shouldn't be our steady state. And so I like to vacillate between a sense of real pleasure and comfort, and then push the envelope again to find where can I learn more. Not to the point of pain necessarily, but certainly to the point of that, oh my gosh, it feels like I'm letting go of the rope again. It comes down to this story of surrender. Surrender, surrender, surrender. As soon as you think you have control of your situation, you're not reaching your full potential. Let go of the rope again. And there again lies one of those potential dangers that we have in Biology Base Camp is if you think that following the rules and regulations and all of the prescribed things, that's the story of your ultimate potential and your ultimate survival, you're missing the point. And so we got to keep bringing each other, not just me, you, but we need to bring each other, your coaches, you guys as a community, we need to start and keep bringing each other back to, are we too comfortable? Are we letting go of the rope? Are we trusting that the universe has something more grand and more extraordinary than we're experiencing today? And I believe that that's almost what we prove out every day in the science lab. We blow our minds on a regular basis under the microscope, only to realize we've only started to ask the right questions and we haven't seen any of the real answers yet. And so push that envelope, surrender, surrender, surrender. That's my only secret that I've got for you so far in my own transformational journey. Keep letting go of that rope. What else you got?
Love it. Well, we're all learning together too.
That's right.
As we grow and share. So a couple questions on phase angle. Please go into further detail about the importance of phase angle in the BIA assessment, how to improve one's phase angle reading without adding fat mass, and ideal readings to aim for.
So phase angle, again, a metric, nothing more than a metric. Never has brought health to somebody to get their phase angle checked. It's just a reference point. And so I don't really glue myself to the phase angle as the test that I do every 3 months or anything like that. It gives me a snapshot on an annual basis of my patients or myself as to where am I at in the trajectory of some of my goals. Where am I generally at in my ability to hydrate the inside of the cell? Where am I at with the general kind of cascade of life between kind of optimal health up in the 10 to 12 range of your phase angle and that biologic limits of kind of down around 3.5, somewhere in there, where biology kind of ceases to exist. And so that's the cascade that we have. We've pointed to the reality that the vast majority of cancer patients that come in will be below a 5. And so if death at the biology level, we should all acknowledge again and again that death doesn't really happen to you. Your soul continues. As soon as your heart stops, that's when you get to go into the white light and have all the experiences all my ICU patients have reported. And so life doesn't end there, but your body might. And so the body might stop at 3.5. And so you can imagine cancer ultimately is not a disease. It's a symptom of a collapse of the phase angle, if you will. It's a collapse of your optimal hydration that's manifesting this severe dysfunction that would lead to the accumulation of injury inside of a single cell to the degree that 20 to 25,000 unrepaired injuries would culminate in the process of cancer. And so cancer is way down at the bottom of that viable scale. So obviously, knowing that information, you'd like to stay above a 5 would be a good goal. I really take peace when my phase angle is kind of 6.5 and above. I feel pretty darn good. We've seen a lot of people radically improve their health with the cancer journey and other chronic conditions when they move their phase angle from a 4.5 to a 6.7. And the vast majority of that sudden shift in improvement is visible when they are at that 6 to 6.5 range. As far as I know, maybe most of the magic's happening between 4.5 and 5.2 or something like that, but they're sick enough that I just don't have the right metrics to show that, whoa, the radical stuff happened way down there, and then to go from 5.2 to 6.7 was a minor piece of the journey. But where I visibly see a clinical shift, and I can say, when a patient walks in, I can be like, whoa, that's a different phase angle even before we draw it, because they're emanating energy, coming with a giant smile, they're pumping just, with great stuff. You can often see that phase angle before it's measured. And so that phase angle, threshold of maybe 6.5 is kind of a sense of like, okay, if I'm above that, I'm cruising pretty good. But if we start holding on to that rope and say, well, I can keep up with my current routine because I'm a 6.7 or I'm a 7.2 or whatever number you reach, you're not letting go of the rope. And so let go of the rope and challenge yourself. Let's push this paradigm. Let's get healthier. Why? Because I believe wisdom has really accrued over the years. And if we're going to share our wisdom, we want to be alert and healthy to share that with our grandchildren and everything else when life matures.
Beautiful. All right, let's talk a little bit about detox. So you mentioned that when you've done a 5-day fast, you still experience signs of, quote, detoxing. What are some physical signs our bodies are detoxing, some of your favorite detox tools and products, and then also what do you think of colonics?
Very good. I'll probably forget about 2/3 of those
elements
there. That's a good crowded question there. So one of the elements there is kind of what are the symptoms of detox as it continues to happen to me when I go through a fast. It should happen. This isn't something that shows that you haven't gotten clean enough. No matter how many times you do a fast, you should be clearing something out of your cells. Remember that a lot of the toxins you need to clear are actually made through normal healthy cell processes. Urea nitrogen is one of those accumulative product within your cells that's made through normal nitrogen metabolism and everything else that's going on in the respiration of your cells, and that urea needs to be cleared. And if you're dehydrated inside of the cell, you're not going to clear it as well. So just because you're detoxing doesn't mean that you're full of some sort of glyphosate or other heavy metal or something. You can detox from your own kind of metabolic waste that hasn't cleared from the cells. So don't despair if you're having, quote unquote, detox symptoms every time you do a healthy fast, because in fact, we should all be able to pound more water into the cells, get more junk out, no matter how many times we go through this process. What I may have been referring to that you may have heard during Biology Base Camp is my experience tends to change with every single fast I have. And so my experience that I just shared with you a few minutes ago where I had foamy, weird smelling urine, that's never happened again like that. My urine will turn yellow a couple hours or a day into my water hydration, but I don't get any weird changes or anything else. But other things can crop up unexpectedly. And the last fast I did, or maybe it was the second last, I can't remember now, but in one of my recent fasts, I had on day 5, I woke up first thing in the morning with an unbelievably horrible metallic taste in my mouth. I've never had that in my life. I've never had it since. But I woke up with this unbelievable taste in my mouth as if I'd been sucking on a steel bar for hours, and that lasted for about 6 or 7 hours. At lunchtime that day, I still had the remnants of that metallic taste, but by that evening it was gone, and again, it's never come back again. And so I cleared something in that time, And I've had a few people say, well, you were clearing heavy metals clearly. Well, that's almost a little too obvious for me to hang my hat on. It tastes like metal, therefore it's metal. Maybe it's that obvious, but I think it could have just have easily been there was a huge osmotic change. The osmotic quality of your body is its hunger for water at the cellular level. So I could have simply had a big shift in my osmotic gradient and pulled a bunch of stuff out of my cells that had nothing to do with metal at all. So who knows what it was? It's irrelevant. I know that whatever it was got out of my cells. I'm glad I cleared it and moving that through. One of the things that it comes up often when we start to think about detoxification is where do those toxins go once they're mobilized, right? And so if you're burning liver cells and you're liberating toxins that were stored and stagnant in these fat cells, and that goes into your bloodstream, now what happens? This is again where the 4-minute workout and the hydration protocol come in big time, because the place that you can clear toxin are the following. Number one, your urine. If you're not hydrating during your fast, you're not getting the full potential of your detoxification. That goes for intermittent fasting and your day-to-day as well. If you're not hydrating, you're not detoxing well. Number two, let's see, I just lost my train of thought on that. I apologize. So I was taking you through the fasting process. Oh, detoxification. So some of the misperceptions and realities of detoxification is where we clear those toxins from. So one of them is in the urine. So stay hydrated and pee out the toxins. Number two is your sweat. Moms Across America is run by Zen Honeycutt, real great woman, great thinker, and a great public speaker and advocate for the anti-chemical environment and everything else. And she's really done a good job of educating moms. The best way for their kids to detox is to get them to sweat for at least 15 minutes a day. I strongly agree with that. Sweat is a huge mechanism that can clear an enormous amount of toxin. As you may know, with your body, it turns out the skin is one of your biggest organs to exude junk from the body. And when you sweat, you mobilize a lot of those. You can measure heavy metals in the sweat when you sweat for a period of time, so you're clearing toxins through that pathway. Plastics and other things and endocrine disruptors can come out through the sweat. And so it's a great mechanism by clearing these toxins. So everything from 4-minute workout to a longer respiratory workout, that breathing mechanism is the third one. All right, so we had urine, we've got sweat, and the third one is breath. And so if you do some breath empowerment series during your fast, you're going to have a really trippy freaking experience in days 4 and 5 if you do warrior breathing. So you do your 20 minutes of warrior breathing when you're already in that heightened state of the medium-term fast there. Now things can get really crazy, specifically with oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone released from the posterior of the pituitary and interacts with the pineal gland. We often call it the God hormone because it's associated with a lot of these experiences we're kind of outside the body or big spiritual expansions as the oxytocin hormone. Oxytocin also happens at the moment of orgasm. And so whether it's orgasm or the breathing techniques or extreme exercise, athletes are famous for the runner's high and everything else. That's again this oxytocin release in intense exercise that can happen. You can achieve that through the warrior breathing. So whether it's through intercourse or breathing or any of these things, all of these are bringing you into this space to detoxify better. Breath, sweat, urine, your big 3 pathways for getting toxin out when you're fasting and detoxing the body. What else you got, Meredith?
Well, just on top of that, what do you think of colonics and coffee enemas and maybe bentonite clay in conjunction
what
with
about
detox
putting stuff
too?
up your butt? Perfect thing to talk about next. Well, so this is a weird topic, right? So obviously when I was a Western medicine allopathic doctor, we looked at these things kind of like witchcraft, colonics and the like must be for woo-woo crazy quacks that would danger themselves by putting stuff into their rectum and colon. And then of course as doctors we were sticking 20 feet of colonoscopes up people's rectum and perforating their bowel and then biopsying, stabbing the wall of their thing and tearing tissue out of the... We're crazy. Doctors are freaking crazy and we're very good at being brainwashed into what's crazy and what's not crazy. So I did some crazy things as a doctor. I would say colonics is not near crazy. That's an age-old treatment where you're starting to try to change everything from the microbiome to the hydration of the colon and everything else really dramatically. Personally, I've phased colonics out of my clinic. I tried it for a period of time because we were really trying to be aggressive with our microbiome stuff and everything else. I would never discourage somebody from doing colonics if they said they've done it and they've had great success with it and changed their life. It's fantastic. Continue to do what your colonics therapist would recommend. But colonics has become in that kind of category of many, many hundreds of things that I've tried and haven't really hit the mark where I can say I can definitely recommend that to everybody and expect a result. Many, many patients have gone for colonics and not gotten results, and I don't have the mechanism to understand or the metrics to understand who's going to respond and who's not. And I believe that the success rate that I've seen hasn't really justified sending everybody I know to it. That said, one of my best colleagues that I know of is up in Canada. She's a full-time colonics therapist, and I know she works magic all the time. And so I think it's individual to the practitioner probably, and it's individual to the consumer as to whether that's going to benefit you and whether you've got the practitioner that's really going to match to your qualities and what you're looking for and everything else. So there's going to be as much kind of artistic work there in the colonics world as there is in the medical world. So can't come down strong either way on that. The other component of that one.
So it was the bentonite clay, and coffee enemas.
Good. Coffee enemas play a huge role in pain management. That's where I would say I 100% have seen everybody with chronic pain benefit short-term relief with coffee enemas. And I have seen people in really severe chronic pain syndromes, a lot of metastatic cancer to the bone and other things that can be some of the most excruciating pain one can experience. And coffee enemas, again and again, will be one of those things that always takes the edge off the pain. Very rarely does it eliminate pain completely, but it gets it down into that manageable phase where the brain is like, okay, I can deal with that pain. And so as a rescue remedy for pain syndromes, it's a good one. There's a lot of data out there around its use in cancer, and I can't say that it's actually the coffee enema that's making the difference because none of those have been controlled to my satisfaction with saline or some other thing that they're pumping into the colon in that same volume. It's very likely that there is some benefit from the caffeine in the coffee. That's very likely that the oxidants or the kind of reactive qualities of the coffee may be inducing an antioxidant response from the immune system that sits on the other side of that gut membrane. So you get glutathione and other antioxidants revving up because the coffee is acidic and causing an injury. You get a response to that, that can actually be a cumulative benefit. So all of those are theories that we have out there on coffee enemas, but to this date, we've never really worked out the biochemistry and cell biology as to why they seem to work in some people and not others. I would never pitch it as an anti-cancer thing because it doesn't work that way. If anything's anti-cancer in a coffee enema, I believe it's the microbiome shift. We know that microbiome change leads to change in cancer prevalence and cancer behavior. And so if I saw a cancer change direction because of coffee enemas, my bet's on the change in the microbiome rather than the coffee itself that directly induced that cancer process. So that's just kind of my global experience to date on coffee enemas. Bentonite clay, I would say do that orally rather than through the colon. If you're doing an oral detox regimen, you're going to reach far more cell membrane surface with an oral approach than you will through a rectal approach. The reason, of course, is surface area and the direction of travel through the gut. So you can do bentonite clay rectally, but it's never going to get up into the small intestines from there. And it's in the small intestines that something like bentonite clay is going to do the bulk of its work, I believe. So I would say any oral detox or any detox stuff that you're trying to really pull toxin out, I would think oral rather than rectal in that case. What else we got?
Yeah, great. So this is a question on age tweaks. Would you recommend anything different in the protocols to someone over the age of 65?
In general, no. I instead of looking at that chronologic age, I would more look to the biologic age. You've certainly met 65-year-olds that look and act like they're 40. I've got a few colleagues that are in their 70s that act like they're 16. I've got a colleague that's flying in tomorrow who's 83. I'm pretty sure he's actually 22 at the biologic age. And so, you can see this all the time. But on the same wavelength, you can certainly see 45-year-olds that look like they're 60. And so we can have much different biologic aging that's completely divorced from our chronologic age. For that reason, I never would say by age 65 you need to do this, that, or the next thing different. As we age, obviously, we become more prone to sensitivity to any stimulus, right? And so I would say that's something to just be aware of. Our geriatric community in the Western medicine world is classic for having 5 to 6 times as much reactivity to their medications than a younger population. So the number of side effects they accumulate, the amount of drug-drug interactions that are evident in a geriatric population are going to be far greater. And so just keep that in the back of your mind. As we biologically and chronologically age, we tend to get more sensitive to whatever interface we do. And for that reason, whether it's supplements or fasting or nutritional changes or everything else, just give yourself more leeway for that transition to happen. You may not want to pivot on a dime, you may want to pivot on a quarter, something like that. All right, what else we got?
Love it. All right, question on mouth breathing. How can one determine if he or she is a mouth breather during sleep? And if so, how would you fix it?
The best thing is probably to ask your spouse. If you're not married, then date somebody for a couple of nights long enough to be able to sleep in the same hotel room, but not necessarily in the same bed. I don't know. But the journey is obviously, if you've got somebody around, that's the quickest and easiest way to do it. And you can do that if you don't have a partner and you live alone. You can certainly do that with a sleep study. I sent innumerable patients for sleep studies over the years, and those can be expensive to do. And so they're usually done in a hospital type room. It's kind of like a dumbed down hotel room that they have you stay in, and they've got some monitoring equipment will tell you what kind of breathing you're doing throughout the night and how that compares to your sleep cycles and your REM state and everything else. Now I've kind of drifted away from that because of the cost to my patients. There's now the technology to do home sleep studies, and so you can talk to your physician about getting a home sleep study done. I believe the acronym for the company that does it nationally, I'm probably going to miss this one, but the first two are ID. It's a 3-letter acronym. I think it's IDS is the company, but you can probably Google up home sleep study and find a company that will ship you the equipment for that. And they usually need a physician request for that, so you can talk to your doc. They can order a home sleep study. Your insurance company usually pays for it. Even if they don't pay for it, it's only $180 to get it done versus the copay for a sleep study in the hospital is more like kind of $600 to $1,200 depending on your insurance plan. And so it's pennies on the dollar if you just do a home sleep study and get a lot of the same useful data. So are you sleeping well and are you breathing well? You can usually answer those things in general ways there. You'll certainly rule out sleep apnea and the rest. Mild mouth breathing, probably going to be missed on that. And so I would just look, if you're worried about just mild mouth breathing and not so much kind of more the severe snoring or sleep apnea patterns that you can be at risk for as a mouth breather. If it's just mild mouth breathing, it's dryness of mouth. Also gum disease. And so if you're a mouth breather at night, you'll be more prone to gingivitis, you'll be more prone to dental caries and erosions and dead teeth and needing root canals and the rest. And so if your dentition is poor, inexplicably, you eat pretty healthy, you try to take good care of your teeth, and yet you have poor dentition and your gums are unhappy, I would suspect mouth breathing being high on that list of culprits there. So dry mouth, that's waking you up in the middle of the night where you have to go drink every night because your mouth is dry, or unexplained dental stuff can be symptoms of that mouth breathing at night.
Great. And someone typed in too, as far as mouth breathing, there's a good app called Snore Lab to track and listen to it. So might be a good little tool if anybody's curious about tracking their mouth breathing. So,
excellent. Love that, Rec. Thanks for throwing that in there.
Yes, Snore Lab. Question, what is your opinion about ozone therapy? And would oxygen derived from ozone therapy have similar benefits to oxygen derived from the splitting of water molecules?
Yeah, so ozone is one of the many things that can come out of water. And so when you ionize water and you break apart the H2O molecule, you're going to get a rearrangement of hydrogen and oxygen in multiple different variants. Ozone is O3, 3 oxygens tied together. Nascent hydrogen usually is released at the same time, 2 H2s, or 2 H's in the form of H2. And so you've got H2 and O3 being liberated by the lysis of multiple water molecules. And so that process of ionization, I believe, happens inside your body all of the time through natural processes. Hydrogen in its form of H2, as we've told you in Biology Base Camp, is a potent selective antioxidant, helps soak up hydroxyl free radicals and helps regulate the NR2 pathway, all kinds of different things. And the science is emerging very quickly on this as to things that we thought were purely hydroxyl free radical scavengers. We're finding out they have other signaling mechanisms that may be responsible for their anti-inflammatory and stabilizing qualities of hydrogen. All that said, when you break apart water, you get lots of miracles to happen simultaneously, not just ozone. And so that's where I think we usually go down the wrong pathway. We say, oh, ozone is good for us. You got to keep in mind it's a pure oxidant, meaning it's going to tear electrons off of just about anything it finds. A pure oxidant can be helpful to stimulate an antioxidant response. The perfect example of this is vitamin C. So vitamin C is actually a molecule that carries and releases hydrogen peroxide. Vitamin C is not a vitamin, it's actually a hydrogen peroxide delivery system. And so we've only come to call it a vitamin because of some erroneous science back in the day when we were naming vitamins, but ultimately it's just a hydrogen peroxide carrying molecule. Vitamin C, if you take it every day in very high doses, will stress the system, cause inflammation, and be a challenge to your immune system and everything else. However, if you do very high dose vitamin C once a week, you induce a huge oxidant stressor in which your body responds to all that hydrogen peroxide is, oh my gosh, I got to get glutathione made, and you have this huge antioxidant response, and you don't take vitamin C the rest of the week, that antioxidant is now churning away and treating all of the other oxidants in the body, and so you get a net positive anti-inflammatory effect from vitamin C intermittently. Take daily vitamin C intravenously in high dose, you actually increase the risk of death and not decrease it. So this is a good example of the ozone story. Ozone, a pure oxidant like hydrogen peroxide, is going to tear electrons off of things. And so you've got a pure oxidant. And so you're going to want to do ozone intermittently so that your body has the ability to now recover the glutathione effect and take advantage of that surge of glutathione that's going to respond. If you're always breathing ozone or you're always exposing your body to ozone, you're going to have a problem. So how much ozone is right and how much hydrogen peroxide and how much nascent hydrogen is the right amount for the human body? And in the end, the microbiome emerges as kind of the coolest thing in the book. The microbiome, it turns out, makes all of these things. The microbiome is far and away, in a healthy system where your gut's healthy and you're booming and you're thriving, your gut makes way more hydrogen than you'll ever get from an active hydrogen tablet or anything else. It's only when my patients start to really push into the inflammatory cascade where I think, okay, the Active H2 or some other hydrogen producing tablet is going to be helpful for them to kind of augment that. And you don't drink Active H2 in every single bottle of water you drink. You might do it in 1 or 2 bottles a day. Get a surge of it, and then the rest of the day, your body's responding to that antioxidant effect. And so on and off is always a good threshold with all of these things, ozone, hydrogen peroxide in the form of vitamin C, any of these things on and off, not chronically. Let your body adapt to that nascent environment. What else you got?
Beautiful. All right, why don't we do one more protocol question and then we have a couple other and then we'll wrap up. So this is a gallbladder question. How do we support bile function without a gallbladder? Do you recommend oxbile or other digestive enzymes? And then another person, how do I support my sluggish gallbladder?
Yeah, so the gallbladder is always going to respond to the acidity of the material that's deposited in the small intestine from the stomach. And so my favorite by and far is HCl with betaine or pepsin. Hydrochloric acid is the best way to change not only the gastric motility and the rate of emptying of the stomach, but also the appropriate response from the gallbladder, the pancreas, and the liver. Remember that the gallbladder isn't just holding one thing. It's carrying a complex family of salts that are made by the gallbladder, by the liver and the pancreas in the journey towards digestion. So a myriad of enzymes, a myriad of digestive salts and compounds to change the pH. Then there's buffers in there that are going to change and respond to that acidic load to make sure that it alkalinizes that bolus of food quickly so that the general pH within your duodenum, which is the first section of the small intestine, stays around 8. And so your pH of your stomach may be 2.8 to 3.5. It's down near or below battery acid levels of acidity. And then just 1 inch into the duodenum, you've got a pH of 8. That's well above basic, so or the neutral threshold. So you've got this big, huge variation in pH that happens in inches of the intestinal lining because of the action of the gallbladder's response to that acidic challenge. It is very, very common after the age of 45, 50 to have an underacidification of the stomach. If you've ever been on chronic antacids, especially the proton pump inhibitors, you have an atrophic stomach lining. You've destroyed your ability to make acid, and now your likelihood of small bowel overgrowth from bacteria that's seeding your small intestine from your sinuses, because you're postnasal draining all night long into your stomach, that can't kill it because the acidity is not there, and so that bacteria ends up in your small bowel and starts populating with bacteria that should have never been there. So that bacterial overgrowth versus just a poor emptying of the gallbladder because it doesn't detect any need to empty because there's no acidic stimulation, those are all playing into it. So acid, acid, acid all day long. Every single meal, take those HCl tablets with the meal, with the first couple bites, not on an empty stomach. Push the threshold of the consumption of those. If you're not getting a response with 1 or 2, push it up to 4 or 6 tablets with every meal until you start to feel a warm flush in the stomach. Once you start to get that warmth in the stomach again, and you get that really nurturing kind of, oh, I'm really digesting and I'm in a comfort zone right now, push it to that. If your experience is cold belly and bloating and it feels like the food is hitting you like a rock, you're not acidifying the stomach enough 9 times out of 10. So go after the acid all the time. Digestive enzymes. Betaine, pepsin, they're on the tail end of that HCl. Those are the only ones I use just because they're attached to the HCl. If I could get an HCl without it, I'd probably just use the HCl because I think that's where your benefit's coming. That said, betaine has some interesting qualities other than its fact that it's an enzyme. Betaine has a very, very high glycine residue number in it, and so there's lots and lots of the amino acid glycine in there. Glyphosate, the chemical that's in Roundup and all these herbicides, has a backbone of glycine that's bent and disturbed by the chemical processing into glyphosate. It's got a big phosphate on one end, carboxyl group on the other, and you've screwed up the molecular structure. And Stephanie Seneff and many other scientists around the world are starting to be concerned that part of the problem with glyphosate-laden foods is that the glyphosate is starting to act like glycine, and it's misfolding our proteins as we try to start building proteins out of these amino acids. So having a competitor of glycine against glyphosate increases the likelihood of you being able to grab healthy glycine amino acids for the building blocks of healthy proteins that will be the right shape and folding. And so for that reason, love this other side of HCl as betaine to get that glycine load into the system. Other enzymes. In general, I'm not a fan, just in the same way I'm not a fan of hormones. I don't like giving people insulin because I want their body to make insulin. I don't like giving thyroid because I want their thyroid to make thyroid hormone. That said, you do find yourselves in situations where you're completely, up a creek without a paddle until you can make some adjustments and everything else, and so you end up using thyroid or insulin as a band-aid at times. If you're taking enzymes, I want you to see them as a band-aid, not a fix. And so just keep that in mind as you go forward. 9 times out of 10, actually I'd say 99 times out of 100, I never reach for enzymes in my patients and don't need to. But I think there is that rare patient where I'm like, man, I have checked all of the boxes in the nutrition category. They've been on their Restore, they've been on their HCl, I've checked every single box and they're still not thriving. I do have a colleague not a few minutes outside of Charlottesville that I can refer patients to, and she does a very big nutritional evaluation from the lens or from the Umfeld or perspective of the digestive enzymes, and she has dozens of enzymes that she works with and will usually tailor them for my patients. By and large, I haven't seen miracles happen with enzyme therapy, but I think that there probably is. I can say there probably has been a few patients where I've really seen them kind of slowly move back towards gut health through the use of enzymes. And so I usually will tell people, if you're going on an enzyme routine, don't expect a magic bullet, don't expect to feel better in a week. This could be a long process of getting your gut back in line. Ultimately, though, acidification, get that gut to empty that gallbladder, I think you'll be on track. Keep in mind when you start going cross species, I was asking about ox bile and things like that. At that point, we've thrown the textbook out the window. We don't know if that's going to be good for you or not. Certainly that animal's making a completely different series of enzymes. You're talking about a rumen gut once again, so let's not bank on getting any big bang for the buck in the human gut lining from a rumen assortment of enzymes. Just in the same way with probiotics, the vast majority, 99% of the probiotics on the market are bacteria that have been derived from cow intestine, not from human gut microflora. So we keep being ironic with our use of everything from dairy to probiotics to digestive enzymes that are trans species, when in reality, if we think for a moment, like, I think we got the wrong species and we're expecting too much from these trans species experiences, and we're probably banking on those a little too much. So I would look broader and look back towards the basics. Frequent grazing, acidify the meals, get the Restore in there, be on the journey there. Don't expect it to be done in a day. Reprogram for the next 18 months and see where you get to.
Love it. All right. Well, we're coming up on the end of the hour, so 2 more quick questions, and then you can kind of bring it all full circle for us. So I love this question. Is the M in M Clinic for Miracle? And what research are you working on right now?
Awesome. Great question. And thank you all for being with us tonight. I'm just very, very grateful for your presence again. And I wasn't expecting to be moved by tonight, but every time I engage with you guys, I get moved, and I'm always almost on the verge of tears or frankly crying at moments. So thank you for taking me to that verge again tonight. I wasn't expecting us to go to that place, and it's always special when we touch that place because it means we're both being present. You're being present with me, and you got me to that place, so I appreciate that. The M is an interesting journey for us. Originally we were Revolution Health Center, and then we started to realize, the downside of a revolution is at some point the fighting's over and you actually are just the paradigm, and then you don't need a revolution. You need transformation and other things other than revolution. And so my mindset of revolution was very war oriented, and I was combating the allopathic Western medicine viewpoint when I set out with Revolution Health Center to do something different and to now I realize it's not about trying to win. It's not about being in combat with the common paradigm. It's not trying to beat anybody. It's not trying to be smarter than anybody. It's simply creating a path that works for me and having my patients build that path wider through their own transformation and experience. And therefore we get to something bigger than revolution. We get to something bigger than an alternative. We get to a truth. And when you get to truth, you get to really profound ripples throughout society. And our ripples are getting really weird and big. There's rippling into the IT world, into the political world, into the energy world and our energy company and all of this stuff that's being fueled out of the huge energy of Restore, which is about communication. And when we do communication well down at the cell level, we do it great at the big level. And so there's so much coming down the pike that I wish I had another hour to tell you all about. But my parent company is called Seraphic Group, SERAPHIC group.com. And Seraphic Group is really taking all of the wealth that we see pouring out of the international support for Restore and our clinic systems and everything else, and we're channeling that right back into our parent company, which is a breeding company for brilliant companies that are looking for products that are revolutionary in their own right, but that we don't want to fight a fight. We want to create a new norm that's magical and transformative for the planet. So we have an energy company, we have software companies, we have a cyber currency coming out, we have the blockchain integrated into that. So lots of really cool technologies coming out, and they're all about one thing in the end. How do we get humans to communicate more seamlessly and without third parties interrupting us? And the M in M Clinic is for every M word you can think of. That's wonderful. And so if you look at the branding on the M Clinic website, there's a bunch of M words all over that, everything from metamorphosis to mission to magic and the rest. Miracle as mentioned here. And if you come to our clinic in Virginia, you'll see we've got these M words pasted all over all the windows in all the way around our complex. And so we'll have a lot of people who will just start walking around the clinic reading the windows to look at all the M words before they ever become a patient. And one of our favorite patients, she's an 8-year-old girl who came in with a lot of challenges. She came for her second visit at the clinic a few weeks ago, and she'd written me a letter. And it's in classic 8-year-old writing where everything like gets bigger and smaller as it goes across a single word, and all the wonderful things that happens in kids writing. And she says in her thing, Dr. Bush, I love being a patient at this clinic, but you forgot one M word, and it is microbiome. And so we forgot to put microbiome on our M list of all the things to leave off the list. And so we appreciate her pointing that out to us. So microbiome, miracle, magic, all of that is M. But the bigger thing with M is actually that it's the center of every of the vast majority of written alphabets that have ever existed, which is really interesting. So any language you look at, that sound of M comes to the center point. And we believe that we have, ultimately, when we find biological truth and we find atomic physics and its truths and we see them collide and define something about spirituality, we know we're at some sort of center point of truth. And that's why we've come to M to represent everything we've found in the clinic. It's a tipping point of truth. It's a center point. It's a place to gather. It's a place to meet. And interestingly, the M is actually also the only letter in the alphabet that's come to represent both the masculine and the feminine, which is interesting. So you have both the V for the sacred cup there of the feminine, and you've got the spade of the male, and you've got this whole combination within that single letter. And so there's something about masculine and feminine balance. There's something about the balance of language and communication that has brought us down to the distillation of M. So thanks for that question. It's an interesting journey that we've had to find that M, and we're excited to see where that company is going. So why did we create Intrinsic Health Series? To motivate and impassion and transform patients through a new pathway that doesn't include sitting in the same room as I am or our other practitioners, but we kind of expand that impact. Number two, we want to radically change the way healthcare is delivered in the United States and ultimately throughout the whole globe. How are we going to do that? We now know that the real path, again, is not to fight the current paradigm. We don't need to go argue with Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield over reimbursement patterns or whatever it is. I did that for many, many years, lobbied with Congress and everything else to try to get Medicare changed. I lobbied for Medicaid, did all this stupid stuff because it was all for naught, to only find out that all we have to do is create a smooth alternative that really works, and the whole Titanic that's sinking, which is the Western medicine paradigm, is going to sink itself, and we don't have to go fight that at all. We should spend zero energy bitter or angry or fighting against the current paradigm because it's literally sinking in the ocean, having hit the iceberg many years ago. And so what we need to do is focus on the quality of the lifeboat that's been put in the water and make sure we scale that thing up to thousands and thousands of lifeboats. And what I really believe is humanity is going to do much bigger when we disperse the power, whether that's a non-centralized power grid or a non-centralized banking system or a non-centralized healthcare system. We're going to be much better off with tens of thousands of boats and vessels in the water than with one giant Titanic that's at risk for sinking the whole operation. And so with M Clinic, we envision all of the brilliant integrative clinics across the country being able to be powered by M. And so in your journey in joining us in Intrinsic Health, you are part of the building blocks that are leading us to the point of capacity to scale suddenly nationwide, where every clinic that wants to become a part of us can say, I'm powered by M, and all of their patients become eligible to take the Intrinsic Health Series and be coached by our vast team of coaches that's growing all the time now, to be coached into this philosophy and transformational journey that you've been on. And for every human that takes that journey before the rest, it makes that path easier, broader, more well-trod, which changes the literal energy of the program. The frequency of vibration of this program will change color over time as the vibration gets higher and higher and higher. And it's going to get easier and easier and easier for us to get more and more profound results every time. We have done Biology Basecamp enough times right now that I can guarantee you that every single one we've done has had more profound transformation as the population gets hit with more and more energy, and we see bigger and bigger stories of its ripple effect through the greater community. And so you're part of that journey. If you want to know some of the miracle you're involved with, it is the future of health in this country. It is the ultimate reversal of the collapse of human health as we deliver a completely different health paradigm where we stop paying for health insurance, which is just waiting for us to get sick before it pays out. Instead, do health assurance. That's assuring the health of every individual that enters it by putting them through not just Biology Basecamp and beyond biology, but ongoing coaching. As you finish this up, you've wrapped up your journey. Ongoing coaching is available to you. You can purchase it in blocks of 4 or 8. You can keep going with the coach you have. We want you to be engaged in this journey. If you need a coach, use the coach. You've experienced coaching now. Maybe you've never experienced that before. You have a new tool in your cabinet. If you don't want to reach for that right now, you want to see how it is for a few weeks without it or a few months, go for it. We are excited for you to find your own feet and your own pace. But I always get benefit every time I reach back for my coach and get my own 30 minutes alone. I've never failed to get growth out of that experience. And so keep looking to that coaching, knowing that you're going to continue to accelerate yourself And you're going to continue to trod that path deeper for everybody else coming behind you and make the vibration higher so that we can transform from a health insurance to a health assurance program to really vitally transform this so that by the time your kids are on this journey, the world will be a different place. That's the goal. You're on it with us. Thank you for joining us in the whole program and certainly tonight.